In Thailand, there is a way people live with money that feels almost invisible if you're not paying attention. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't try to impress. And it certainly doesn't look like the kind of financial success we're used to hearing about. You notice it slowly. A small cafe closes in the late afternoon, even though there are still people walking by. The owner smiles, wipes down the counter, and locks the door without hesitation. There is no sense of urgency, no anxiety about missed opportunities, no feeling that time is running out. In another part of town, a market vendor counts the day's earnings. Not with excitement, not with disappointment. Just calmly, as if the numbers were information, not judgment. What stands out isn't how much money is made. It's how little emotional weight the money seems to carry. These people are not chasing wealth, but they are also not afraid of money. And over time, a quiet question begins to form. Why do some people feel at ease around money, even without excess, while others feel constant pressure despite earning more than enough? The difference is rarely found in intelligence, and almost never in math, because money does not enter human life as logic. It enters as experience. Long before we understand budgets, savings, or investments, we learn how money feels. We feel it in the tone of conversations, in moments of silence, in tension that fills a room when bills are mentioned, in relief when something is finally paid for. These moments leave impressions, not as clear memories, but as emotional associations, and those associations stay. This is why money so often bypasses logic entirely. Hence, when a financial decision appears, the body reacts first. A tightening, a rush, a sense of comfort or danger. The mind follows later, trying to make sense of what the body has already decided. This happens so quickly that most people never notice it. They believe they're choosing rationally, but in reality, they are responding emotionally and explaining logically afterward. That's why money feels heavy to think about for so many people. Not because it's complicated, but because it's loaded. Money carries fear, money carries hope, money carries memories of safety and moments of vulnerability. It carries comparison, it carries shame, it carries identity, and when all of that is present, logic struggles to take the lead. You can see this everywhere. People delay checking their bank balance, even when they know the numbers aren't catastrophic. They avoid conversations about money, even with those closest to them. They make quick decisions in moments of emotional intensity, and then spend months justifying them. None of this is stupidity, it's conditioning. Money has been training emotional responses for years before logic ever had a chance to speak. This is why earning more money rarely solves financial stress. The numbers change, but the emotional relationship stays the same. Fear simply scales up. Pressure becomes louder, and the feeling of never enough persists, regardless of income. Until the emotional layer is understood, money remains something that happens to people, rather than something they feel steady around. This audiobook is not about teaching financial techniques. It's about slowing down enough to notice what actually happens before decisions are made. Before the calculation, before the plan, before the explanation. It's about seeing money as it truly operates in human life, as a psychological experience first, and a logical system second. Because once that order is understood, something subtle changes. Money stops feeling like an enemy to outsmart, or a problem to constantly fix. It becomes clearer, quieter, more manageable. Not because you suddenly know more, but because you finally see where money decisions truly begin. And only from that place does money begin to make sense. Chapter 1. Money is felt before it is understood. Before a single calculation appears, something else has already happened. A reaction. Money enters the body first, not the mind. There is a subtle shift, sometimes barely noticeable. A tightening in the chest. A quiet sense of relief. A rush that feels like opportunity. or a discomfort that signals danger. Only after that reaction does thinking begin. This order matters more than most people realize. Because when it comes to money, the body often decides long before logic arrives. Picture a familiar moment. Late at night, someone scrolls through their phone, not searching for anything in particular, just filling the quiet. An advertisement appears. The message is simple: limited time, special offer. There is no immediate thought of budgets or priorities, and what appears first is a feeling, a sense of wanting something to shift, a desire for relief, a small spark of excitement in an otherwise ordinary evening. The hand pauses for a second. If the purchase happens, it will later be explained logically. It was a good deal. It will be useful. It was affordable. But the explanation will come after the emotional signal has already done its work. This pattern repeats itself in countless forms. A raise feels like permission to relax. A loss feels like a threat to stability. An unexpected expense triggers anxiety that has little to do with the actual amount. Money is never processed in isolation. It arrives wrapped in meaning, safety, control, freedom, belonging. These meanings are not learned from textbooks. They are learned through experience. That is why financial decisions often feel urgent, even when they don't need to be. The nervous system reacts to money the same way it reacts to risk and reward, quickly, automatically, without waiting for analysis. Here is another quiet example. A man checks his bank balance before going to bed. He already knows the number will be fine. Nothing unexpected happened that month. Still, there is hesitation. Not because of logic, but because of anticipation. That brief pause, before the screen loads, is emotional memory at work. The body remembers previous moments when money felt uncertain. It prepares itself before the mind can intervene. When the balance appears, there is relief, not because the number is impressive, but because the threat didn't materialize. This relief has nothing to do with intelligence, and it has everything to do with conditioning. Money trains emotional responses over time. Those responses become reflexive, and reflexes are faster than thought. This explains why financial advice often struggles to change behavior. Advice speaks to the mind. Money speaks to the nervous system. When those two are misaligned, knowledge loses. People don't fail financially because they lack information. They struggle because their emotional responses override what they already know. This is also why sudden changes in income rarely bring lasting peace. When money increases quickly, emotional patterns don't update at the same speed. Old fears remain, old habits persist. The scale changes. The feelings do not. A larger paycheck doesn't remove anxiety. It often amplifies it. Fear becomes fear of losing more. Pressure becomes pressure at a higher level. Without emotional awareness, money simply magnifies what already exists. Understanding this reframes the idea of discipline. Discipline is often imagined as control, as forcing oneself to behave correctly. But force is rarely effective against deeply ingrained emotional patterns. Awareness works differently. Awareness creates space. It allows a pause between the feeling and the action, a moment where the reaction can be noticed instead of obeyed. That pause is where real choice begins, not in willpower, not in restriction, but in recognition. This chapter is not about changing habits yet. It's about seeing where habits come from, seeing how quickly the body reacts to money, how convincingly emotions present themselves as rational thoughts. Once that sequence becomes visible, self-blame begins to dissolve. You stop labeling yourself as careless or undisciplined. You see that you were responding to signals that felt real, and that understanding changes the tone of every decision that follows. Money starts to feel less like a test you keep failing and more like a language you are finally beginning to understand. Not because you've mastered the numbers, but because you've noticed what speaks first. And when that first voice is recognized, logic finally has room to speak, not as a justification, but as a guide. Chapter 2. Early money memories never really leave. Long before money becomes something you manage, it becomes something you absorb. Not through lessons, not through explanations, but through atmosphere. Money is first learned the same way language is learned, by being surrounded by it, by watching how people react when it appears, by sensing what changes in a room when it is mentioned, by noticing what becomes tense, quiet, or urgent. A child doesn't need to understand numbers to understand what money means. They learn it through tone, through pauses, through what adults avoid saying. Consider a small moment. A child sits at a kitchen table while two adults talk nearby. The conversation is calm until bills are mentioned. Voices lower, sentences shorten. Someone sighs. Nothing dramatic happens. No argument. No explanation. But something is recorded. Money equals tension. Years later, that child may grow up earning well. They may understand budgeting, saving, and planning. And yet, whenever money comes up, their body tightens slightly. Not because of current reality, but because of remembered atmosphere. This is how early money memories work. They don't show up as clear images. They show up as emotional reflexes. Another example. A teenager asks for something small. New shoes, a school trip, a simple request. The answer isn't no, but it comes with hesitation. A pause, a calculation spoken out loud, a reminder of how hard things are. The message isn't verbal, it's emotional. Money equals burden. Money equals guilt. Later in life, this person may struggle to spend money on themselves. Even when they can afford it, they don't think, "I don't deserve this." They feel it. And feelings don't need words to be powerful. Some households treat money as something dangerous. It's hidden, not discussed, kept behind closed doors. Children grow up sensing that money is serious, risky, and fragile. Others grow up in environments where money is spent freely, but never explained. Money appears and disappears without context. In those homes, money can feel unpredictable. Here one moment, gone the next. Both environments create patterns, not right or wrong, just absorbed. This is why people often feel confused by their own financial behavior. They ask themselves, why do I react like this? Why does money make me anxious? Why can't I feel calm, even when things are okay? The answer usually isn't found in adulthood. It's found much earlier. Money memories don't fade with time. They fade only when they're seen. Here's a quiet illustration. An adult receives an unexpected bill. The amount isn't catastrophic. They can handle it. Still, there's a rush of panic. The mind knows it's manageable. The body reacts as if it's not. That reaction belongs to a younger version of them. One that didn't have options. One that learned early that surprises around money were dangerous. The past speaks through the present, not as thought, as sensation. This is why advice that ignores emotional history rarely sticks. You can't override a reflex with logic alone. You can't reason your way out of something that was never reasoned into you in the first place. Early money experiences shape expectations. Some people expect money to disappear. Some expect it to cause conflict. Some expect it to bring temporary relief, followed by stress. Those expectations quietly guide behavior. They influence how much risk feels tolerable, how much safety feels enough, how long waiting feels possible. Two people can be in the same financial position and feel entirely different levels of security. Not because one is wiser, but because one learned early that money stays, while the other learned that it doesn't. This chapter is not about blaming parents or circumstances. Most adults did the best they could with what they knew. Money was often stressful for them too. And stress passes itself down, not through intention, but through exposure. Understanding this changes the way you see your reactions. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Where did this come from?" That shift matters. Because once you recognize that your emotional responses to money were learned, not chosen, they lose some of their authority. They become signals, not commands. This is where separation begins. Separation between past conditions and present reality, between inherited reactions and current choice. Not by force, not by denial, but by awareness. When you notice a reaction and recognize its age, it softens. You realize that the feeling may be familiar, but it may no longer be accurate. Money stops being a replay of old moments and starts becoming something you can relate to differently. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consciously. This chapter doesn't ask you to change anything yet. It simply asks you to notice where your money reactions began. Because when you see the roots, the grip loosens. And once the grip loosens, new patterns become possible. Chapter 3. Why intelligence rarely brings financial peace. Intelligence creates clarity in many areas of life. But with money, clarity does not always bring calm. This feels confusing at first. If understanding leads to better decisions, and better decisions lead to better outcomes, then knowledge should ease financial stress. Yet again and again, the opposite appears. Some of the most anxious people around money are also the most informed. They read books. They follow markets. They understand concepts like risk, diversification, and long-term thinking. Still, when money enters the room, their bodies tense. The explanation isn't found in a lack of intelligence. It's found in the role intelligence plays. Intelligence explains, it anticipates, it simulates future outcomes, and when paired with emotional uncertainty, and those abilities don't calm the system, they amplify it. Consider a familiar scene. A highly capable professional sits at a desk late at night. A spreadsheet is open, numbers are correct, the plan is sound, yet something feels unsettled. The mind runs scenarios. What if the market shifts? What if income slows? What if this assumption is wrong? Each question is reasonable, but together they create pressure. The issue is not lack of knowledge, it's over-engagement. Intelligence keeps the mind active long after the decision should be resting. Money becomes a mental loop rather than a solved problem. Here's another quiet example. Two people receive the same financial advice. One listens, nods, and moves on. The other analyzes it deeply. They research alternatives, compare strategies, question assumptions. Weeks later, neither has taken action, but the second person feels far more stressed. Not because the advice was worse, but because intelligence, when ungrounded emotionally, keeps reopening the question. This is the hidden cost of being smart with money. Knowledge widens the field of possibilities, but without emotional stability, possibility feels like threat. Every option carries a downside. Every decision feels incomplete. The mind doesn't settle. This is why intelligence alone cannot produce financial peace. Peace does not come from having fewer unknowns. It comes from tolerating them, and tolerance is not an intellectual skill. It's emotional. Think about how people react during financial uncertainty. Some remain steady, even without deep technical understanding. Others spiral, despite having all the data. The difference is not who understands more. It's who can remain regulated while not knowing everything. Money, unlike many problems, is never fully solved. There is always risk, always uncertainty, always future variables. An intelligent mind sees all of them. Without emotional grounding, that awareness becomes exhausting. This explains why some people become trapped in perpetual preparation. They are always learning, always refining, always waiting for more certainty. Action is delayed, not because they are careless, but because they see too many angles at once. Money turns into a problem that never feels complete. There is also a quieter pattern. Some intelligent people use knowledge as a form of control. Understanding becomes a way to manage anxiety. If they can just learn enough, predict enough, optimize enough, then they will feel safe. But safety doesn't arrive. Because safety is not created by information, it's created by internal steadiness. Here is a small illustration. An investor checks their portfolio daily. They understand volatility. They know long-term thinking matters. Still, they check, not to make changes, but to soothe uncertainty. The numbers fluctuate. The mind reacts. Each check briefly satisfies curiosity, then reactivates concern. This cycle is not about strategy. It's about emotion seeking reassurance. Intelligence becomes the servant of anxiety. This chapter is not a criticism of knowledge. Understanding money is valuable, but it's incomplete. Without emotional regulation, intelligence turns money into a constant mental project. Always unfinished, always slightly threatening. This is why financial peace is more closely tied to temperament than intellect. Temperament determines how someone reacts to uncertainty, how they sit with risk, how they respond to waiting. These qualities are not taught through books. They are developed through awareness, experience, and restraint. Some people naturally pause before reacting. Others accelerate. Neither is moral, but one creates calmer outcomes. Money rewards patience more reliably than cleverness, because patience reduces unnecessary movement, and unnecessary movement is expensive. Understanding this shifts the focus. Instead of asking, "How can I be smarter with money?" a more useful question appears. How can I remain steady when I don't have complete certainty? That question doesn't demand more information. It asks for emotional capacity. This chapter doesn't suggest abandoning intelligence. It suggests repositioning it. Intelligence is most useful after emotions have settled, after urgency has passed, after fear has been recognized. Only then does thinking clarify rather than complicate. When emotional stability comes first, intelligence becomes a guide. When it doesn't, intelligence becomes noise. This is the quiet reason why some people with modest knowledge experience more peace than experts. They are not smarter, they are calmer, and calmness, when paired with time, does more for financial outcomes than brilliance under pressure. Chapter 4. Spending as emotional regulation. Spending is rarely just about buying something. On the surface, it looks practical, a product, a service, an exchange. But underneath, spending often serves another purpose. It regulates emotion. People don't always spend because they need more. They spend because they want to feel different, relieved, comforted, distracted, rewarded. This is not a character flaw. It's a human response. Consider a familiar end-of-day moment. Someone finishes work late. The day felt heavy, unresolved, draining. They didn't fail at anything specific, but they didn't feel good either. On the way home, they stop somewhere unnecessary, order something indulgent, buy something small they hadn't planned on. The purchase isn't extravagant, it's reasonable, affordable, and yet it wasn't logical. No, it was emotional. The money wasn't buying the object, it was buying relief. For a moment, the day softened. This is how spending often works. It doesn't solve problems, it smooths feelings. That smoothing can feel harmless, even healthy, but over time, patterns form. Some people spend when they feel depleted. Some spend when they feel bored. Some spend when they feel successful. Each pattern serves a different emotional need. Spending after stress says, "I need comfort." Spending after success says, "I deserve this." Spending after comparison says, "I need to catch up." None of these thoughts are spoken clearly. They are felt, and feelings move faster than intention. Here is another quiet example. A person receives praise at work. It feels good, but also fleeting. On the way home, they buy something unnecessary, not expensive. It's just symbolic. The purchase anchors the feeling. It makes the moment tangible. Without it, the praise might fade too quickly. Money becomes a way to preserve emotion. This explains why budgeting often feels restrictive to people. Budgets are designed around numbers. But spending is often driven by mood. When emotion and structure collide, structure usually loses. Not because people are undisciplined, but because emotion is seeking regulation, and regulation feels urgent. Another pattern appears when people feel out of control. Uncertainty in one area of life often increases spending in another. Someone feels powerless at work. They make decisive purchases elsewhere. Someone feels uncertain about the future. They buy things that create a sense of immediacy. Spending becomes a way to reclaim agency. At least this I can decide. This is why impulse purchases often come with clarity, after the fact. In the moment, the decision feels obvious. Later, it feels confusing. People ask themselves, why did I do that? The answer isn't stupidity, it's regulation. Money was used to shift an internal state. Understanding this changes the tone of self-judgment. Instead of asking, why can't I control myself? A more accurate question appears. What feeling was I trying to manage? That question doesn't accuse. It observes. And observation creates choice. This chapter isn't suggesting that all spending is emotional. Many purchases are practical and intentional, but a significant portion happens at emotional inflection points. Moments of fatigue, moments of transition, moments of comparison. This is also why online shopping is so effective. It meets people where emotion already lives. Late at night, during boredom, in isolation, there is no friction, no pause. Emotion moves directly into action. Another subtle pattern emerges around restraint. Some people pride themselves on not spending, but even restraint can be emotional. Saving can feel like safety, like control, like protection. In those cases, not spending regulates emotion just as spending does. The behavior differs. The mechanism is the same. Money becomes a tool to manage internal states. This understanding removes moral weight. Spending is not good or bad. Saving is not virtuous or flawed. They are responses. Responses to feelings that often go unacknowledged. When those feelings remain unseen, money behavior feels automatic. When they are noticed, space opens. That space doesn't demand perfection, and it doesn't demand suppression. It simply allows a pause where a different choice might appear. Not always, not instantly, but sometimes. And sometimes is enough to change direction over time. This is where financial calm begins. Not with stricter rules, not with harsher discipline, but with awareness of why spending feels necessary in the first place. Once that reason is seen, money stops being the only tool available for regulation. Other options appear: rest, delay, conversation, stillness. And when money is no longer responsible for managing every emotion, it becomes lighter, more neutral, more logical. But only after emotion has been acknowledged. This chapter doesn't ask you to stop spending differently tomorrow. It asks you to notice. Notice the moment before the purchase. Notice the feeling driving it. Because when spending is seen clearly, it loses its urgency. And urgency is what makes money feel out of control. Chapter 5. Saving, Control, and the Fear. Beneath saving is often praised as discipline. It's framed as responsibility, as maturity, as proof of control. And in many cases, that's true, but not always. Sometimes, saving has very little to do with discipline and everything to do with fear. This is uncomfortable to admit because saving is usually treated as the good behavior. Spending is questioned. Saving is celebrated. Yet when you look closely, both can be driven by emotion. Consider a quiet, familiar pattern. Someone checks their savings account frequently, not to plan, not to invest, just to look. The number itself brings comfort. Seeing it reassures them that things are okay. When the number goes down, even for a planned reason, something tightens. Not because the expense was wrong, but because safety feels reduced. The reaction isn't logical, it's physical. This is where saving shifts from strategy to regulation. Money becomes a buffer against uncertainty. The larger the buffer, the calmer the system feels. But the calm is conditional. It depends on the number staying intact. Here's another example. A person has more than enough saved, no debt, stable income. Still, they hesitate to spend on small things, not luxuries, not excess, just ordinary comfort. They tell themselves they're being prudent, responsible. But inside, there is a different sensation. Spending feels like exposure, as if something protective is being removed. This reaction often surprises people. They ask themselves, why does this feel so hard when I know it's fine? The answer usually isn't about the present. It's about what saving represents emotionally. For some, saving means safety. For others, it means control. For others, it means survival. The money itself isn't the point. The feeling is. Saving becomes a way to hold the world at a distance, a way to prepare for unnamed threats. Many people who save aggressively aren't imagining specific disasters. They're responding to a general sense that things could go wrong, and that sense is often inherited from times when money was scarce, from environments where stability was fragile, from moments when being unprepared had consequences. Those experiences don't disappear when income improves. They simply go quiet, waiting to be triggered. This is why some people feel safest when they're accumulating. Growth feels comforting. Movement upward feels like progress. But when saving slows or reverses, anxiety returns. And even if the decision makes sense, even if the expense is intentional, the emotional system doesn't evaluate context. It reacts to loss. Another subtle pattern appears around control. Saving creates a sense of order. Accounts are organized. Balances are known. Plans feel structured. That structure can be grounding. But when saving becomes the primary source of calm, it also becomes fragile. Because life is not static. Unexpected expenses happen. Transitions occur. Money moves. When movement feels threatening, flexibility disappears. People become rigid. They avoid opportunities that involve spending. They delay decisions. They cling to safety long after it's needed. Again, not because they are irrational, but because saving has become emotionally charged. It's no longer a tool. It's a shield. This chapter is not criticizing saving. Saving is essential, but it's important to notice why saving feels important. Is it supporting long-term stability, or is it soothing short-term fear? The difference matters. When saving is driven by fear, no amount ever feels sufficient. There is always a higher number that promises peace, and that promise is rarely fulfilled. Because fear doesn't resolve through accumulation, it resolves through safety felt internally. Without that internal safety, numbers simply postpone anxiety. This is why some people feel anxious even with substantial reserves. The threat isn't external, it's internal, and money is being asked to solve something it can't. Understanding this reframes restraint. Not all restraint is wise. Not all spending is reckless. Both can be emotional responses. And both can be attempts to feel okay. The goal is not to eliminate emotion from money. That's impossible. The goal is to recognize when money is being used to manage fear rather than plan for reality. That recognition changes behavior naturally, not through force, but through clarity. When you see that a hesitation is rooted in fear, you can pause, not to override it, but to listen. Is this fear about the present or about the past? Is this decision protecting me or limiting me? Those questions don't demand immediate answers. They simply open space. And in that space, saving returns to its proper role, a support, not a shield, a tool, not an identity. This chapter doesn't ask you to save less or spend more. It asks you to notice how safety is being defined. Because when safety comes only from numbers, money will always feel heavy. When safety is shared between preparation and inner steadiness, money becomes lighter, more flexible, more cooperative. And from that place, both saving and spending can exist without tension. Another layer appears when saving stops being a behavior and quietly becomes an identity. Some people don't just save money. They are the person who saves. They are known for it, respected for it, sometimes even admired for their restraint. And over time, that identity hardens. Spending then feels like more than a financial choice. It feels like a personal failure, not because the expense is wrong, but because it contradicts who they believe they are. As this is where money decisions become emotionally loaded in a different way. A person like this may delay necessary purchases, not out of logic, but out of loyalty to an internal image. I'm the careful one. I'm the responsible one. I don't waste money. Those statements feel stabilizing. They create order, but they can also become restrictive. Because life eventually asks for flexibility, a move, a change, an investment in comfort, time, or health. And when spending threatens identity, the resistance feels intense. The fear underneath is not financial, it's existential. If I let go of control here, who am I then? This fear is subtle. It rarely surfaces as a clear thought. Instead, it shows up as hesitation, as endless reconsideration. There is a feeling that something is not quite right, even when everything makes sense on paper. There is also a deeper illusion hiding here. The belief that control equals safety. Saving creates predictability. Predictability feels safe. But life does not operate on static balance sheets. Unexpected things happen, not because of poor planning, but because change is unavoidable. When safety is built entirely on control, any disruption feels threatening. This is why some people with strong savings feel deeply unsettled during transitions, even positive ones. New opportunities require movement. Movement requires uncertainty. And uncertainty conflicts with the emotional role money has been assigned. In these moments, money is no longer serving life. Life is being organized around money. This is a quiet inversion that many people never notice. They believe they are being prudent, when in reality, they are being governed by fear of instability. The irony is that this often leads to rigidity. Opportunities are missed. Relief is postponed. Quality of life is delayed indefinitely, always for a future moment when it finally feels safe enough. That moment rarely arrives. Because safety defined purely by numbers has no finish line. There is always a higher threshold, a larger buffer, a new reason to wait. Understanding this doesn't mean abandoning preparation. It means redefining safety. Safety is not just the absence of risk. It's the presence of adaptability, the ability to respond without panic, the ability to move without losing identity. When money supports adaptability rather than control, saving becomes lighter. It still exists, it still matters, but it no longer carries the entire emotional burden of survival. From that place, spending no longer feels like collapse. It feels like choice, and choice, real choice, is what financial security was meant to create in the first place. Chapter 6. Why earning more rarely makes money feel lighter. At some point, many people reach a quiet milestone. They earn more than they once thought was enough. Not extravagantly, not wildly, just enough to breathe a little. And yet, something feels off. The pressure doesn't disappear. The sense of weight around money remains. This is confusing. From the outside, the problem seems solved. From the inside, the feeling persists. The reason is simple, but rarely acknowledged. Money doesn't feel heavy because there isn't enough of it. It feels heavy because of the emotional patterns attached to it, and those patterns don't dissolve when income increases. They scale. Consider a small shift. Someone receives a raise. Not dramatic, just meaningful. For a short time, there is relief. Bills feel manageable. Choices feel wider. But gradually, the mind adjusts. Spending increases slightly. Expectations recalibrate. The same level of concern returns. Now attached to larger numbers, what once felt like security becomes the new baseline, and the emotional relationship with money remains unchanged. This is not failure. It's adaptation. Human systems normalize quickly. Without emotional awareness, income simply expands the existing pattern. If money was associated with fear, earning more creates fear of losing more. If money was associated with control, higher income creates pressure to maintain a higher standard. If money was associated with self-worth, earning more raises the stakes. Here's a familiar example. A person reaches a salary they once dreamed about. Years earlier, they believed this level would bring peace. Now, they check their accounts more often than before. Not because they are struggling, but because the consequences feel higher. More responsibilities, more commitments, more expectations. Money didn't remove anxiety, it upgraded it. Another quiet pattern emerges. As income grows, so does the internal voice that says, "Don't mess this up." That voice watches every decision. It questions spending. It questions rest. It questions risk. Even pleasure feels conditional. The person may say they feel fortunate, but internally they feel guarded. This is why financial pressure often follows people upward. It doesn't come from scarcity. It comes from attachment. Attachment to a lifestyle. Attachment to an identity. Attachment to not going backward. The emotional system doesn't measure absolute numbers. It measures change and threat. Losing 10% feels painful, regardless of whether the starting point is small or large. This explains why advice that focuses solely on earning more often disappoints. More income solves logistical problems. It doesn't resolve emotional ones. Those must be addressed separately. There is also a subtle illusion around earning. People assume that higher income creates control. In reality, it often creates complexity. More accounts, more obligations, more decisions. Each layer adds cognitive and emotional load. Without inner steadiness, that load becomes exhausting. This is why some people simplify even as they earn more. They reduce expenses, they narrow focus, they choose fewer commitments. Not because they can't afford more, but because calm becomes more valuable than growth. Here is a small illustration. Two people earn similar incomes. One constantly feels on edge. The other feels relaxed. The difference is not how much they make. It's how they relate to variability. One needs certainty to feel okay. The other can tolerate fluctuation. Tolerance creates ease. Intolerance creates tension. Money rewards tolerance over time. Not because tolerance earns more, but because it prevents unnecessary reactions. Fewer reactive decisions. Fewer panic-driven moves. This is why earning more is not the turning point people expect. The turning point is internal. It's the moment when money stops being used to prove safety, status, or worth. When income is no longer asked to fix emotion, it becomes lighter. Not magically, gradually. This chapter is not suggesting that earning more is irrelevant. Income matters. But it is not a substitute for emotional clarity. Without that clarity, money simply changes scale. With it, money changes quality. The difference is felt. Choices slow down, urgency fades, decisions feel less charged. Money stops feeling like something you must constantly manage and starts feeling like something that supports life. This shift doesn't happen when income crosses a number. It happens when emotional patterns are seen and softened, when fear is recognized rather than fed, when control is loosened rather than tightened. From that place, earning more no longer carries the promise of relief. It carries opportunity. And opportunity feels very different from pressure. Another reason money doesn't feel lighter as income grows is that emotional baselines rarely move on their own. Every person carries an internal reference point, a quiet sense of what feels normal, what feels safe, what feels acceptable. When income rises, that reference point does not automatically adjust upward. Instead, the external numbers move faster than the internal calibration. At first, this gap feels like relief. Then it closes. What once felt abundant becomes ordinary. What once felt generous becomes expected. The emotional system resets. This is not greed. It's adaptation. The nervous system is designed to normalize conditions quickly. Without conscious awareness, it treats improvement as temporary and prepares for loss. That preparation shows up as vigilance, more monitoring, more checking, to more internal pressure to hold on to what was gained. This is why people often feel more careful, not freer, after earning more. The mind starts guarding a new standard. There is also a subtle shift in identity. Higher income quietly changes how people see themselves and how they believe they must behave. They feel they have more to protect, more to justify, more to maintain. Choices that once felt neutral now feel consequential. Rest feels earned rather than natural. Spending feels scrutinized. Mistakes feel heavier. Money hasn't become lighter. It has become more emotionally loaded. Until the baseline itself is examined, income keeps chasing a moving target. Peace remains just ahead, always attached to the next level. Understanding this reveals something important. Relief does not come from raising the ceiling. It comes from lowering the internal tension. When the baseline shifts internally, when enough becomes felt rather than calculated, money finally begins to relax its grip. Not because there is more of it, but because it is no longer being asked to constantly prove safety. Chapter 7. How comparison quietly turns. Money into a burden. Money does not exist in isolation. It never has. Even when numbers are private, even when accounts are hidden, money is experienced socially. It is felt in relation to others. Not because people want to compete, but because humans are wired to orient themselves through comparison. This happens quietly, without intention, without awareness. And when it comes to money, comparison changes how everything feels. Consider a simple moment. Someone feels fine about their finances. Not proud, not anxious, just fine. Then they hear a story. A friend bought a new house. A colleague received a promotion. Someone their age is doing really well. Nothing about their own situation has changed, but the feeling has. What was neutral now feels insufficient. What felt stable now feels fragile. Money hasn't moved. Perspective has. This is how comparison operates. It doesn't attack logic. It attacks context. It quietly rewrites the question from "Am I okay?" to "Am I behind?" And once that shift happens, money begins to feel urgent. Deadlines appear that were never real. Timelines tighten. Choices feel heavier. Not because circumstances worsened, but because reference points changed. Here's another quiet example. A person scrolls through social media in the evening. They weren't looking for financial inspiration, but images appear: travel, homes, lifestyle upgrades. Each image carries an unspoken message. This is what progress looks like. This is where people your age are. Even when the mind knows these images are curated, the body reacts. A subtle pressure builds. Comparison doesn't argue. It suggests, and suggestion is powerful. Money starts to feel like a measure of adequacy, not just utility. This is where money becomes emotionally heavy, because it's no longer about needs or plans. It's about positioning. Am I ahead or behind? Am I winning or losing? Am I doing enough? These questions rarely lead to calm decisions. They create motion, more striving, more urgency, less patience. Comparison compresses time. What once felt acceptable over years now feels overdue. This is especially true when comparison happens within similar groups. Same age, same industry, same background. The closer the mirror, the sharper the pressure. Someone else's progress begins to feel like your delay, and money becomes the scoreboard. Here's the quiet cost of that shift. Decisions stop being made for alignment and start being made for relief. Relief from the feeling of falling behind. People take on obligations they don't want. Stretch financially to meet invisible standards. Rush choices that needed time. Not because they lack discipline, but because comparison creates discomfort that demands resolution. Money becomes the tool to resolve it. This is why comparison is so effective at draining peace. It doesn't require scarcity. It thrives in abundance. Even people doing objectively well can feel constantly behind, because there is always someone doing more. This chapter is not suggesting that comparison is avoidable. It's natural. But there is a difference between noticing others and measuring yourself against them. One is informational. The other is destabilizing. When money decisions are made to keep up, they are rarely satisfying. The goalpost moves immediately. A purchase brings temporary relief, followed by renewed pressure, because comparison doesn't want satisfaction, it wants movement. Another pattern emerges here. Comparison often hides behind motivation. People say they are pushing themselves, raising their standards, wanting more. Sometimes that's true, but often the push is reactive. It's driven by discomfort, not desire. And discomfort is a poor long-term guide. This is why some people feel strangely calm after stepping out of comparison. They don't stop caring. They stop measuring. They stop using other people's outcomes as signals of what their life should look like. Money decisions slow down. Urgency fades. Choices begin to reflect values rather than pressure. This doesn't make them passive. It makes them selective. Money becomes less about pace and more about direction. This chapter doesn't ask you to disconnect from the world. It asks you to notice when comparison enters the room. Notice the moment money starts to feel heavier after exposure to someone else's life. That feeling is not a signal to act. It's a signal to pause, to ask a quieter question. Is this pressure coming from my needs or from my surroundings? That distinction changes everything. Because when money is guided by internal reference points, it feels manageable. When it is guided by external ones, it never settles. There will always be another benchmark, another example, another reminder. Understanding this softens money's grip, not by lowering ambition, but by restoring orientation. Money stops being a race you didn't agree to enter and becomes a resource aligned with your own timeline. And when comparison loses its influence, money becomes lighter. Not because you have more of it, but because it no longer has to prove where you stand. Chapter 8. When money finally becomes logical. There is a moment that doesn't arrive loudly. No milestone announces it. No number confirms it. No achievement certifies it. Yet when it happens, you feel it. Money becomes quieter, not absent, not irrelevant, just quieter. This moment doesn't come from earning more. It doesn't come from optimizing better. And it rarely comes from finding the perfect system. It comes from emotional stability. After everything explored so far, the reactions, the memories, the intelligence, the spending, the saving, the income, the comparison, one pattern becomes clear. Money only becomes logical after emotion settles. Before that, logic is reactive, defensive, justifying. After that, logic becomes directional. It helps instead of argues. Consider how different decisions feel when urgency is gone, and there is no rush, no tightness, no pressure to prove anything. Choices slow down, not because you hesitate, but because you don't need to escape a feeling anymore. This is the point where money changes role. It stops being a regulator of emotion and becomes a responder to intention. That shift is subtle, but profound. When emotion dominates, money decisions feel heavy. They feel consequential, charged. When emotion is understood, decisions feel lighter. They feel proportional, appropriate, not easy, but clear. This is why emotional stability is a financial asset. It reduces unnecessary movement. It reduces reactivity. It reduces the cost of urgency. Calm doesn't eliminate risk. It allows you to face it without distortion. Here's a quiet illustration. Two people face the same financial decision. One feels pressure. The other feels space. The first rushes to resolve discomfort. The second waits for clarity. Time works in favor of the second person, not because they are smarter, but because they are steady. Steadiness compounds. This is rarely emphasized in financial conversations because it doesn't sell urgency. But over long periods, it matters more than strategy. Emotional stability allows patience. Patience allows alignment. Alignment allows consistency. And consistency is what quietly builds durable outcomes. This is where wealth begins to be redefined. Not as accumulation, not as status, not as comparison, but as capacity. The capacity to wait, the capacity to say no, the capacity to choose slowly. These capacities are invisible, but they shape everything. A person with emotional stability doesn't chase money. They respond to opportunities when they fit. They don't avoid risk, they assess it without panic. They don't ignore growth, they just don't sacrifice peace for it. This is when money finally feels logical. Because logic is no longer asked to calm fear, justify impulse, or defend identity. It is free to do its actual job. Evaluate, compare, decide. Logic thrives in calm conditions. Emotion doesn't disappear in this process. It becomes informative rather than directive. A feeling arises. It's noticed. It's not obeyed automatically. This creates distance. Distance creates choice. Choice creates dignity, and dignity changes the entire relationship with money. Money stops feeling like a test you must pass and starts feeling like a system you can work with. Not perfectly, not constantly, but intentionally. So this chapter doesn't offer a technique. It offers a recognition that money was never meant to carry the full weight of safety, identity, and worth. Once those burdens are lifted, money becomes simpler, still serious, still meaningful, but no longer overwhelming. The paradox is this. When money stops being emotional, it becomes logical, not in theory, in experience. And when money becomes logical, it stops dominating attention. Life opens up. Decisions spread out across time. Pressure diffuses. Perspective widens. This doesn't make someone rich overnight. It makes them stable. And stability is what allows wealth to grow without chaos. This is the quiet ending most people never hear about, because it's not dramatic, but it lasts. Money finally finds its place, not as a source of constant tension, not as a measure of worth, but as a tool, responding to a calm, grounded mind. And when that happens, money no longer feels like something you're trying to control. It feels like something that finally makes sense. There is a quiet shift that happens when money finally becomes logical. Attention changes. Money no longer occupies the foreground of thought. It moves to the background, present but no longer demanding constant supervision. This is not neglect, it's integration. People in this state don't think about money less because they are careless. They think about it less because it no longer needs to be managed emotionally. The mind is no longer rehearsing worst-case scenarios. The body is no longer bracing for impact. Money has stopped triggering alarm. This is why decisions begin to feel simpler. Not because options disappeared, but because noise did. When emotional noise fades, clarity feels almost ordinary. There is no dramatic confidence, no rush of certainty. Just a steady sense of proportion. What matters, matters. What doesn't, falls away. This is also when time starts to feel different. Without urgency, time expands. Deadlines soften, choices stretch out. People stop compressing years of expectation into months of pressure. They allow things to unfold. This is not passivity. It's patience with structure. Patience that understands timing is as important as action. Money begins to reflect that patience. Decisions are spaced, moves are deliberate. Mistakes are absorbed rather than magnified. Losses, when they occur, are processed without identity collapse. They are events, not verdicts. This is a subtle but powerful difference. Earlier in life, money losses often feel personal. They feel like proof of failure or inadequacy. In this state, loss feels informational, something to learn from, not something to recover from emotionally. That emotional recovery has already happened. This is where resilience comes from, not from toughness, but from separation. Separation between outcomes and self-worth. When that separation exists, money stops dictating mood. Mood stops dictating decisions, and decisions quietly improve. Another change appears here. People stop trying to optimize everything. They choose what matters and let the rest remain imperfect. They no longer need every dollar to be maximized for meaning. Meaning comes from elsewhere. The money becomes supportive rather than symbolic. This is often mistaken for complacency. It's not. It's maturity. The realization that energy is finite and attention is valuable. Money decisions become fewer, but better. Less frequent, but more aligned. This is also when generosity changes. Not because people give more, but because giving feels lighter. It doesn't threaten safety. It doesn't require calculation. It flows from surplus that is felt internally, not just measured externally. Even restraint feels different. Saying no is not an act of fear, it's an act of clarity. Yes and no regain their proper weight. Neither is rushed, neither is defensive. Both are chosen. This is the quiet end of the journey. Not an ending marked by achievement, but by ease. Money no longer asks to be solved. It asks to be understood. And then once it is understood, emotionally, psychologically, patiently, logic finally feels at home. Not strained, not overworked, just present. Money becomes what it was always meant to be. A system that responds to a calm, grounded relationship. And from that place, life feels wider, not louder, not faster, wider, with room to move, room to choose, room to wait. This is not the kind of wealth that announces itself, but it is the kind that lasts. If you've listened all the way to this point, nothing needs to be added. You already felt what this was really about. This audiobook was never meant to give you answers. It wasn't meant to fix your money or push you toward any particular outcome. It was meant to slow something down, to create enough space for you to notice what usually happens too fast to see. Because for most of our lives, money has been something we react to. We brace, we rush, we explain, we worry, and we rarely pause long enough to ask where those reactions actually come from. Not intellectually, but experientially. Somewhere along the way, money became heavy. Not because it was complicated, but because it carried too much fear, too much meaning, too much pressure to be proof of something. And what this journey tried to do was gently remove that weight. Not by changing your circumstances, but by changing how you stand in relation to them. If there is one quiet idea worth keeping, it's this. You were never bad with money. You were responding to it emotionally long before anyone taught you how to think about it logically. And once that is seen, self-blame softens. Urgency loosens. Choices widen. You don't need to force anything after this. You don't need to promise yourself new rules. You don't need to do better tomorrow. Awareness does the work on its own. It changes the tone of the next decision and the one after that. And slowly, without effort, money stops feeling like an opponent. It becomes something you can work with. Calmly, quietly, on your own timeline. If this audiobook helped you notice something you hadn't put words to before, let it sit. You don't need to share it immediately. You don't need to act on it. Just notice how the next few money moments feel. The pause before a decision, the reaction in your body, the story your mind wants to tell. That noticing is enough. And if at some point you feel like this perspective might help someone you care about, someone who feels intelligent but exhausted around money, you can share it with them. Not as advice, just as a quiet mirror. And if you want to stay with this kind of thinking, this slower, deeper relationship with money, you're welcome to stay here. No pressure, no urgency, just conversations like this, designed to be listened to, not rushed through. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way through. And wherever you are right now, let this be enough for today.